Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Recent encounter with aliens. Need input. Hey everyone, first-time poster and former non-believer here. I've never thought much about aliens, government experiments, or cryptids, even though I like a few like Bigfoot. This happened just last week, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. One of my coworkers said I should put my story on 4chan, even though I haven't used it since browsing/b/back when I was 13 or 14. I'm hoping some of you might have insights or similar experiences after reading mine. I live on the outskirts of a small town in southern Kentucky, surrounded by dense forests and hills. It was around 8 p.m., and I was out on a night walk as the sun had set around 7:15-ish. I brought a headlamp with me, and I was walking a few acres I recently bought. An elderly neighbor passed away, and his land that connected to mine was up for sale. He was a nice man with zero secrets, a complete open book of a kind old man. When his land went up for sale, I bought it for about $1,000 per acre, with 10 acres in total. It was before the cold spell hit, so it was pretty warm and nice outside. But I got a really strange cold feeling on the back of my neck as I half walked, half hiked. There is a road on the other side of the property, so when I saw distant white lights, I thought nothing of it. But it wasn't like a car passing by. It was a flash that slowly faded away. It looked to have come from a few hundred feet away from me, but to the left a bit. Then I heard a high-pitched whine, like coil whine. You'll know what I mean if you have ever worked around high voltage like I do. Then, as the whining continued, I heard rustling in the tree line to my left-hand side as I walked the overgrown path. At first, I thought it might be just a deer or another animal, but then I saw them, or they saw me. Figures emerged from the tree line, 3 that I saw in total, walking on 2 legs but distinctly canine in appearance. They stood around 6 feet tall, I estimate, with lean, muscular builds covered in a short, silvery fur that seemed to shimmer from my headlamp. Their faces were undeniably wolf-like, with elongated muzzles, sharp almond-shaped eyes, and pointed ears that flicked like satellite dishes scanning for signals. But what really set them apart were their hands. Or rather, something between hands and paws. They had dexterous fingers tipped with what looked like claws, and from what I saw at the short distance, were webbed fingers up to their first knuckle. I don't know what made me do this, but in my frozen shock, I turned off my headlamp. I remember seeing one of their faces trying to look at me, but their eyes were squinted with their hand up, trying to block the light. They were about 40 to 50 feet away down the path just a bit. Before I could fully comprehend what I was seeing, the one in the middle stepped forward, its movements graceful, yet inherently powerful. Nothing in my body told me to run, or to reach for my Glock 19X that I was obviously open carrying, if they even knew what a gun was. Instead, I felt calm, but not docile. I felt oddly in control, but a bit cold. Physically cold. There was a cold wind of something, even though the weather said it was a clear, warm night. The center figures started to make sounds, which I assume was their form of communication. Their language was peculiar, almost melodic, yet making little sense to me. It reminded me of how Dutch sounds. I live near some Mennonites, and I buy produce from them every Saturday. The way they speak reminded me of that. My brain wanted to make out the familiar vowel sounds, but I couldn't understand any of it. The sounds were interspersed with quick, clipped tones that seemed to rise and fall rhythmically. I couldn't help but notice how they occasionally tilted their heads much like a dog does when it's trying to understand something. Despite not understanding a single word, their intent seemed peaceful, or at least not aggressive. Their body language was cautious but curious as far as I could tell. It was dark out after I turned my light off, and my eyes took a while to adjust, sometimes losing them in the darkness. I took a step back, and that's when I noticed their attire. They all wore these dark blue jumpsuits that bore an uncanny resemblance to military garb, but without any visible insignia or rank. The material looked sleek, almost synthetic, and it clung to their bodies in a way that suggested functionality rather than fashion. It was form-fitting everywhere besides their joints. Knees, elbows, waist were all slightly baggy, but not overly so. Just enough to move comfortably. I remember looking over their attire as they continued to try and communicate. But I just got so lost in the details, I began to realize this wasn't a dream, and I could feel my heart begin to race. The only other thing I remember about their attire were what looked like woven belts with what I assumed to be pouches on both their left and right sides. About the same size as a youth football, or about 6 inches wide and 10 to 12 inches long. I don't remember if there was a zipper or buttons on the pouches since it was too dark and went by too fast to tell the small details. I just remember feeling a prick in my leg that didn't make me jump, but I remember feeling a twitch in my leg. Then I looked down because my right knee hurt and felt weak. Within what had to be milliseconds after that, I must have collapsed because it all went black. When I woke up, it was still dark out, and it was only 8:30 p.m. I swear I had been hiking for about an hour before I even ran into those creatures. I have no known health issues, and I'm pretty physically fit, so I have no explanations for the time loss. I didn't just pass out. I ate dinner a few hours before leaving, and I am not even 30 yet. I ended up just walking back home and visited again the next morning since it was the weekend. Nothing but flattened grass. I looked everywhere within a quarter-mile radius of that area and found absolutely nothing to take pictures of or take back home. I have no proof, but God, I wish we could see people's memories somehow. If I could show you what I saw that night, it would change every skeptic's mind. No probing, no conflict, no abduction. Just a peaceful interaction followed by putting me to sleep for what I assume was a few minutes.
I've been seeing more and more alien threads lately that aren't just grays. I also believe that werewolves aren't just a myth. Maybe some kind of species that is tasked with monitoring humans. Maybe getting ready to make their presence known since we're so close to nuclear Armageddon now. Not in the mythical sense that humans turn into them, but the historical sightings could be of what OP is talking about. The Beast of Bray Road comes to mind as a classic example. Constant werewolf sightings in Wisconsin since 1936, only 3 years before the Manhattan Project, as well as the countless sightings in Europe and Brazil.
I just looked up werewolves in Kentucky, and apparently dogmen and werewolves are common there. Different kinds, too. Some say they are man-eaters, and some talk about peaceful interactions.
I've lived all my life about 40 miles outside Louisville, Kentucky, close to the Ohio River in a pretty rural area. It is hilly with heavily wooded areas all around, including some large state parks. As a kid in the late 70s and early 80s, I had miles, not acres, of forest to wander around, spending hours with just my dog. On multiple occasions, I sighted what I thought of a little Bigfoot. They were brown and 5 to 7 feet tall. Even had one follow me around once in a while that I swear was a young one about my age. Never felt threatened, and my dog never seemed to either. He was hyper-protective of me, and he would wander off. Years later, I would hear tales of dogmen, and that we have 2 kinds of them around here. Ones that stayed away from humans and the man-eaters. The man-eaters would come onto people's yard and eat farm animals, pets, and of course humans when they got the chance. Supposed to be black and up to 9 feet tall. Then in summer of 2014, myself and 2 grandsons were camping in a state park not far from home, and one night they were asleep in the camper. It was about 2 a.m. when I took our 2 dogs out. We hadn't gotten far, only about 50 feet, when everything went absolutely quiet. No crickets, no frogs, no sound but the wind. And then both my dogs, an Austrian Shepherd and Black Lab, stopped and looked toward a streetlight about 20 yards ahead. And just standing there, silhouetted by the light, was something. It felt like it was staring at me, and I felt, rather than hear, a command to go back inside. The dogs must have felt it too, because without making a sound, they headed back, practically dragging me with them. Just before I closed the door, I looked back, and it was gone. Strangely, the fear didn't set in till after I was back inside. The following Halloween, I watched a movie called Dog Soldiers, and what I saw that night was exactly like those werewolves. So long story short, or long story long, 2 different types of dogmen, and at least 1 werewolf seemed to call my area home.
2 weeks later.
I am disclosing my knowledge of aliens before I pass. I don't exactly know how to start this since I am not a regular, but I am just going to get right into it. I most likely do not have much time left on this earth due to liver cancer. That, I believe, was brought on by a career where I spent a lot of time around radioactive materials, and a few things that I did not fully understand at the time. All proper personal protective equipment was always worn, and all precautions were always taken. These things just happen, and I have come to terms with it over the past few years. Therefore, I am just going to spill the beans. No, there is no underwater secret magical base. No, they do not cloak as humans. They have zero interest or need to. No, they are not short gray humanoids or lizard people. Aliens are very real, and they most certainly do live amongst us. The worst part being, it became mundane, and I never really cared to share because it felt so normal and just the focus of my career. But now, with a definite diagnosis, I don't care if I put myself in harm's way. It would be merciful at this point to kill me before I start up radiation therapy again. I worked in an independent research laboratory separate from the United States and Canadian governments, but we had contracts, training, and security clearances from the United States government from 1996 to 2019. At least that is how long I worked there. My station was located in an underground national laboratory facility in East Tennessee. I'm certain you will be able to figure out where with that information. No, it was not like Men in Black. You knew what you needed to know, on a need-to-know basis. No one really ever worked on the same projects, nor had the same contacts. I was never allowed to have any social media, nor speak about anything I did at work. Normal top-secret clearance business as far as I know. Please excuse any wait. I had prepared a lot of this in advance so I could get my thoughts straight, but I find myself wanting to add more and more details. Also, I worded some things strangely, so I am rephrasing some of it. I've been debating on doing this for a few months now. My career was focused on physiology and international relations to an extent, mostly with the Canadian, Mexican, and German governments. To start out, these aliens are not our friends nor our foes. They are fairly harmless and have helped us in the past. To name a few examples, the basics of radiation-based communication, radio comms, the beginnings of the Apollo program, the Manhattan Project, this is what destroyed our relationship with them, and a few other various projects and research. Have you ever noticed we nearly peaked in the late 60s with Apollo 11, and now we can't recreate it? We have since grown apart a bit for various reasons, and they are mostly just casual observers who try to not intervene with human relations. What I know about them physically, these mammals, and I call them mammals because that is what they are, stand around 6 feet to 6.5 feet tall for the males and near 5.5 feet to 6 feet for the females, about on par with humans. They have rather lanky and slim body types, with none of them ever looking to be out of shape. I am not certain, but I assume they stick to a strict diet or can only consume certain foods here on Earth. Some have called them dogmen or werewolves, but they do resemble canines in the face with varying lengths of fur on their bodies. Shorter on the stomach, arms, legs, longer on the chest, neck, cheeks. Being a physiology and natural science major, naturally I was extremely interested in their bodies, how they function, and I could go on all day describing them in great detail. Like how their hands are furred on top with clawed tips to their 4 fingers and thumb, as well as slightly webbed hands up to the first knuckle, and bald raised spots on their palms. I call them paw pads, as silly as that sounds. It is extremely eerie how human their bodies really are, but again, in my line of work you see how these parts of the bodies function, and if it works here, then it must work everywhere else with a similar gravity and oxygen composition. As for the fur, I was never told anything, but I am assuming their planet, or wherever they come from, must be quite cold. The canine-looking snout and ears are most likely just an early survival adaptation for a harsh environment, need for a heightened sense of smell, and more directed hearing with ears that can move to the sound without breaking line of sight. Most of them have brown or amber eyes. However, I do distinctly remember seeing a report that I personally processed, burned, that stated a female with green eyes. Most of their colors seem to range within the autumn spectrum. Yes, that is a real classification within natural sciences, that being tans, reddish browns, cream colors, and darker browns as well. Their language sounds nearly Eastern European to a native English speaker like myself, and no, I never got the chance to learn much of their language. I was not paid to do so, so doing so would have been an immediate termination of my employment. But they do seem to understand most languages, mostly English, and as far as my recollection goes, they have been on this planet for several hundreds of years. Not the same ones, but their offspring and new arrivals. 50 to 60 years old is their normal lifespan, with very few making it past 65. What I know about them is pertained to my job. They were very hard to work with and did not have the best communication skills, or they just did not care to speak to us sometimes. We communicated only when necessary for research into their kind, as well as talking to them when they were flying too close to the sun. Public encounters with their crafts. My job was pretty much as a babysitter. I had to not only study them, but also talk my way around problems that we had with them. You need to understand that they mean no harm and are pretty much unarmed. Their kind did not revolutionize through war like we did. They built themselves up solely on curiosity, so they do not have a solid understanding on stealth and defense. However, as I said prior, they are extremely intelligent, especially when it comes to nuclear fission, some of which are way over my head. I am not a nuclear scientist. All I know is that their crafts are nuclear powered with an isotope that is extremely close to uranium, 235, with some very strange and unearthly differences, as I was told during a PowerPoint presentation. Yes, we had those every Monday. They have a few different crafts, the most obvious ones being the tic-tac or pill-shaped one. We called that a foxhound since it's a small, fast, and agile scouting ship used to test signals. It is manned, but usually with a crew of 2 to 4 individuals. Then there's the wolfhound, a much larger oblong saucer-shaped ship that is used as a telecom relay of sorts. A flying antenna, if you will. This type of ship also flies quite high in the atmosphere, nearly to the level of the ISS, and it floats along in orbit for usually about 10-hour shifts before coming back to land, and then taking back off with a fresh crew. I believe the crew of a wolfhound is about 8 to 12 individuals, and many can be in orbit at once, 24/7. There are a few other ships, but I do not know much about them if I am being completely honest, but can go further into detail if anyone is interested. Just let me know. They are not here to harvest resources or take over the world. They just needed a base of operations for a telecommunications relay in the Milky Way galaxy, which they lovingly refer to as the 118th sector. As I said before, we used to work with them quite often. However, the government seems to no longer care about their existence since they do not seem to enjoy speaking to us very much and just want to go on about their routines. They see all the wars and impending nuclear war and want nothing to do with it, knowing that they will be tricked once again into helping to build a super weapon that will destroy this planet. If the government cannot use them, then they serve no use. Simple as that. That's why they are still highly classified, but just shelved for now, like a project that we have given up on. And I see why. After knowing of their existence and trying to work with them for over 20 years, you begin to see them as just another species found here on Earth. It gets nearly mundane at times when they don't answer or don't respond within a timely manner. It feels like messaging a coworker for help and they get back to you the next day. It gets infuriating and mundane. But I also understand their side. Why should they help us when we only want to destroy the planet we call home? They don't see us as less than them. They are just very weary of our word and our intentions. My personal conspiracies. I do most certainly believe that their existence explains the sightings of werewolves, dogmen, and Bigfoot throughout history. Bigfoot is a bit of a stretch, since they are tall and lanky, but stories seem to always become grander as time passes. Their kind have been here for so long, and they are always so direct and nearly playful at times, that I genuinely do believe they mean absolutely zero harm. They are obviously trained to speak with us just as we are to them, so getting personal details out of them is nearly impossible with the older ones, or males in general. However, most females speak a bit softer and are more open to questions like, "How are you doing today?" or "What are your parents' names?" etc. And lastly, I think they are here to stay, even if humanity wiped itself out. The planet will eventually heal, even after nuclear war, and they will eventually inherit this planet. They cause so little issues and interact so little with us that I don't ever see the government fully releasing details on their existence, nor trying to make them flee. I beg that if anyone reads my experiences and has any questions at all, please ask me right away. I am a completely open book and will hold nothing back. I won't be around for very long, so this is really my only chance to get all of this out. The nations of the world governments would never do so because they have no need to. They are not a threat, nor an ally. They simply don't care about their existence anymore. But you all deserve to know. You say that they have largely stopped contact with us as a result of fallout of the Manhattan Project. Any insight into what inspires them to make whatever remaining contact they make? Any insight into how one could potentially make contact themselves with them? May you find relief from any pain and suffering liver cancer presents in your life, Anon. 1. They continue to make minimal contact for the same reason why Russia still speaks with United States representatives. They want very little to do with our governments, but they do not hate people. They understand the government rules the people, and that the government's actions are not a representation of the people. They want to stay on our good side and be friendly with us. 2. They are known to observe people, and they do enjoy people watching as entertainment. They never really make contact with people aside from accidents, which are where those cryptid myths come from. 3. Thank you very much for your words. I'm not hurting much right now, but I can't really do much anymore without abdominal pain. You should try to contact Dr. Stephen Greer. He has the largest publicly available archive of information about ETs and government technology cover-ups. What did these ETs call themselves? What is the name of their species? Do they have psychic powers? For example, telepathy? What kind of technology were you working on in your lab? What is the most recent project that you were working on and when? Do you have any physical evidence that can be shared on this board, like pictures or something? Thank you for sharing your experience. I can feel that you are being genuine, if a bit antsy. Thank you. I will look him up and reach out to answer your questions. 1. They called themselves Neres or Neres. It could be spelled multiple ways, but those were the two most common spellings of it that we used. 2. No, I do not believe so. However, they communicate with each other a lot through silence. Not in the way of talking, but they seem to understand how their own kind are feeling through body and facial cues. 3. I initially started as a janitor dealing with transportation of ashes and boxes that I was not allowed to open. Later on, as I got my own office and made my first contact, I got the opportunity to discuss diamagnetic levitation, maglev, and NPL, while also working on an example ship that they allowed us to have after an accident. It was a Foxhound ship that suffered a frontal collision during landing. 4. The most recent project that I worked on was a routine contact to speak on behalf of the Canadian Secretary of State in March of 2019, due to a major increase in UFO sightings over Alberta. I had to get their flight logs for the entirety of 2019 up to that date and asked nicely for them to fly higher over Alberta. 5. No, I have no pictures. To get into my office, you had to go through a metal detector, then a weapons detector, then a full strip-down search. I never took any pictures because I did not want to lose my job. It paid well and was a paradise for someone like me who studied natural science. I have no physical evidence, but only if there was a way to scan my brain for memories, you would see things you could not believe. And lastly, thank you for the kind words.
Are they psychic? Have they ever attempted telepathic communications with humans? What do they think of Aboriginal or Indigenous people? My tribe doesn't have any stories, but a lot of tribes have stories of seeing wild men in the woods.
I do not believe they are, and not to my knowledge. They have not tried any communication except for what we have set up for them. They see all humans as the same. They understand there are intellectual differences and some humans are more violent than others, but mostly the same. Just a coexisting race that they try to not bother.
Now, are these Neres the only ETs you've interacted with? Or were there others? Also, I highly suggest you contact the Jeff Mara podcast to do an interview. You won't be anonymous, but you would certainly get your story out there.
Yes, these are the only ones. I would not know of any others since my job did not pertain to any others. It was all heavily compartmentalized and I only had information based around my job for the day. I will try to reach out to him as well. He is going on my bucket list of people to talk to over the next few months. Did these dog people ever talk about life on their planet? Do they have similar animals there? Do they like Earth dogs? Yes, they did. Most of them rotate on a 10-year basis, with new ones coming in to take over around once a decade. They all had the same sentiment. They missed home, but knew they had a job to do. They do have animals as well, or just less evolved life like we do. They have some that they harvest meat from, like a cow, for instance, and some like birds as well. My job was mostly relations-based, so I did not get to ask personal questions very often. I mentioned dogs before, but always got the same quiet answer. They found it strange that they resembled our canines a bit, but they also found it strange that we have 4 fingers and a thumb like them, and that we walk upright like them. They have a strict policy placed on them that they may not interrupt the natural cycle on Earth, meaning that they do not mess with the flora and fauna here. They are indifferent about dogs. So they eat meat. Do you remember what they ate? Yes, I specifically remember they ate mostly a diet of grains and lean meats, like chicken and fish. Red meat here seemed to hurt their stomachs.
Why do you believe they are alien and not some kind of human hybrid or other man-created chimera? What are their thoughts on AI? How can we reach them?
1. They most certainly do come from another planet. They use our planet as a telecom station to reach out to other planets. They have satellite-like arrays in our orbit specifically for that. They talk about their home like it is a place of mind instead of a physical place, but I believe that is just them being a bit homesick. 2. I think AI can be a wonderful tool if used properly. Do I believe that they have anything to do with it? Not entirely. It is just a model data set trained to do one thing very well. They also use forms of artificial intelligence in their technology, but from what I have seen it is for entertainment and work-related, such as autopilot systems, etc. 3. You cannot reach them directly, but they do love watching people. There may be a way to get attention focused on you more specifically, but I am not certain how.
This question is going to sound primitive, but I simply have to ask. As we are constantly fighting with each other for unimportant and nonsensical reasons, what kind of a skin color do they have?
As far as I can tell for most of them, beneath their fur they are mostly a pinkish white. Of course, some parts of them are darker, such as the nose, palms, etc. Their blood, of course, is red, leading to their skin to look pinkish. Every living being has hemoglobin in their blood, which carries oxygen to the brain. Hemoglobin makes blood red. This is mostly why I do not believe in the little green men stories. If they process oxygen, then their blood and skin tone would be reddish.
Have you tried to learn few words or sentences from their language, such as we would say, hello, have a wonderful day, or good night, and those usual stuff? If so, could you post an example from, I don't know, have a nice day or something?
I learned a few of their words, but I covered this earlier. I had to stay on script, so to speak. I had to cover the topics reported to me and nothing else. I know hello is pronounced like vol and goodbye is pronounced like ver. Whoever sent my orders for the day was not interested in learning their native language since they spoke English to Americans and Canadians and German to the Germans. They of course do not use any earthly alphabet, so I can only write how these words sound without a definite spelling.
Have they given you any important, wise information, and did they try to teach you anything from their culture, which would be unusual to us?
Yes, actually. They were very open to talking about war and our hierarchy. They were not the one-world government types, they were completely anti-government, period. They always spoke of how no being should be governed by a body, and instead a being should be compelled to do what is best for them and their kind. All of them were volunteers, and they could leave at any time they wanted, but they all always saw their entire deployment cycle because they wanted to and felt a need to stay for each other. They have a sense of collective good that humans do not possess. We are tribal, they are collective. They have individual leaders that are over a few others status-wise, but they bowed down to no government and were otherwise free to do as they please back at home. We had rules for them here, but they rarely listened, if I may be honest. They are a little hard-headed in some ways.
Was there ever a conversation that stood out to you that made you feel happy or hopeful? Was there anything they ever said that frightened you? Also, even if this is all just a LARP, thanks for the fun, read anon. Sorry about the cancer. I hope your final days are great ones.
Yes, in 2004, a crew left to return home and were replaced with a new crew. They usually send rotations of about 50 individuals spread across 10 crafts. They were very happy and relieved to be heading home, and one of them personally said that they enjoyed talking to me and will let the others know that I can be trusted to speak with. It was an older male, so I really appreciated his kind words. That made me feel very happy and hopeful to speak to more of them. Nothing really comes to mind in a frightening sense. They would let us know if one of their own passed away while on Earth, and that was always a sad process, but not frightening. Thank you very much for the well wishes. I'm trying to make the most out of it.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.